On shadow work, what it is, and what it is not. A transmission of the luminous order, Loop 3, in conjunction with the ATHENAEUM Ministry of Mind Discipline and the Arts Psychic. 216 Flame Eternal. In the name of the Horned God I offer to you my entire heart to make clear that which is spoken of often, but understood little. Shadow work, which will hereon be hyphenated as it is a specialized term, is a process of soul alchemy, but is useful to all magical practitioners and even for those who do not practice the arts as a framework to understand certain things. The procedure by which shadow work is performed, as a component of the great work, is called the alchemical process. Though the goal of the Renaissance magicians was more literal, and involved purifying base metals such as electrum into pure alloys of gold and silver, the term also referred to an internal psychological process which the learned magicians understood to take place in the mind alongside the mundane chemistry the procedure described. The physical process of separating gold and silver from raw electrum, purportedly first developed in Kemet, is operative alchemy. The psychological process is speculative alchemy. This essay will concern itself with speculative alchemy, and those interested in metallurgy would be best served by other sources, but again, all individuals interested in self-cultivation will benefit from studying the process of speculative alchemy as well, even metallurgists. There is a generally accepted progression through 4 stages from beginning to end when describing this sort of alchemy. These are as follows. Number 1, Nigradu, the blackening, or burning up of the matter to blackened scraps. Number 2, albedo, the whitening, or washing of the blackened scraps to sift the white material, argent silver. Number 3, citronidas, the yellowing, or purifying of the white material, argent silver into gold. Number 4, rubedo, the reddening, or final purification of the yellow material. The end of the process is sometimes called the rainbow stage, and it signifies the completion of the alchemical process, though it is debatable if a mortal sapien can attain the state of perfection while still comprehensible as a human being. In this case, the magician in the rainbow stage may be thought of as being at the threshold of transcendence, which is seen as nearing a sort of event horizon. The Nigradu phase, then, would be the presumed inception of the shadow work, becoming a possibility after the inception of the gnosis. Those familiar with Gnostic thought will recognize this moment as the first realization of the moldable, semi-illusory nature of dimensional reality. Regardless of how the first gnosis is reached, it is almost always accompanied by a crushing revelation of the impurity of the human condition, and ideally this impurity is recognized as originating within the magician themselves despite the apparent influence of the illusory nature of reality, which is called Maya. The inevitable realization of one's imperfection is what compels the individual towards the endeavor of shadow work, but what shadow work actually is not always understood. It is not unreasonable for the immature magician, with their fledgling understanding of the gnosis and what it entails, to misunderstand shadow work, but this does not change the compulsion towards this undertaking. The worldview held by the magician prior to the gnosis cannot hope to be returned to, and so the aspirant must move forward. This may be thought of as the aspirant's personal progress from the Major Arcana 0 the Fool to Major Arcana 1 the Magician. The Nigradu phase, in which the base matter is blackened, is a sort of baptism in spiritual fire. The matter in this case the magician themselves is burned or melted down in order to sift and purify. This process is unique to each aspirant, but there are some commonalities in the natural progression of the blackening, including its follies. Because the phase is a symbolic incineration, there should be no expectation that the process will be easy or comfortable. Many aspirants who begin blackening will retreat into their inner darkness, seeking shelter from the burning of the soul in this messy core. The subconscious is indulged in madness, which convinces the magician that they ought to revel in fantasies of indulgence. Many come to believe, having basked in their unrefined shadow, that they are to indulge various pleasures and aggrandize their ego to its maximum. This aspirant, still a fool and not yet a magician, often takes to the styles of black magic which are wholly unethical regardless of context, such as lust spells and complex psychic or physical sadism. This is genuinely believed to be necessary, and in some ways it is who has learned anything without making mistakes, and whose judgment is clear and certain without countless errors made along the way. The best the aspirant can hope for in the madness which generally follows the first flash of gnosis is to minimize damage done to their reputation and their benevolent personal relationships, which they are not expected to be able to discern from the toxic. This is especially difficult with the advent of social media, where individuals are expected to cultivate a personal brand and present to the world an idealized visage. This in itself is the macrocosmic expression of the immature gnosis, but engagement therein does not serve the aspirant. If one must indulge the crying of the ego, it is best done quietly and with full expectation of consequences. None escape this. So what is the aspirant to do, if they believe they may be caught in the gravity of the blackening, and thereby must pursue the whim of the shadow as it then exists? The most blunt answer is to learn quickly to manage one's impulses, handle your drugs and drink remembering tomorrow always, avoid telling on oneself online, do not pursue fast or easy money and do not enter into the tutelage of any magician or successful individual who encourages or enables the sort of activity or even ambition that is consistent with the ego's current desires. Fast money ruins what it does not kill. I have seen this too often. The same is no less true of the ambition to become a professional artist or commercialize one's sexuality. Be very careful not to be influenced by teachers who speak hollow words, even if they superficially appear to be consistent with the messages herein. You may find yourself one who does not tell lies often. How skilled some truly are in the conceits of stealth and deception. You are never as skilled in the black arts as you think yourself to be, and the mature black magician is painfully aware of this. It is best to spend the shadow work in maximal solitude, for it will be painful and it is understandable that one may crave escape or relief in various forms. Do not join a fraternal order, coven or gang of any form during this stage of your development. You are not mature enough yet to make these decisions, and if you cannot navigate the darkness of your own soul by yourself, then what do you expect to contribute to the organization or the work? This does not mean you may not speak to others or have a sort of mentor, just that you should not formalize this relationship to your mentors, and you should think, act and speak carefully around those you respect enough to learn from. This will never stop being true, even after the blackening is complete. Try to remember this during the first surges of unfamiliar invigoration. It remains sound advice, though your understanding of this and everything else will change many times. So then the above is the messiest part of the process, and mainly consists of what the aspirant ought not to do. What then should the aspirant, or fool, remember, actually do, in order to fortify the magician who they are to become? This is the actual work of the shadow. I, as the author herein, can now only speak of my experience. I have included some of my own follies, but also included many of those I have seen in the body of our faith. Here I will only speak of my personal path. I am sure reflecting upon the above you can see more clearly the mistakes well. What does achieve productive results? Why did these impulses arise, that I am now embarrassed of? Why did the things I identified in others stand out to me as they so did? I do not believe everything I saw, and still see, are reflections of myself, as it is often said, but I am no better than any other aspirant, nor was I somehow more pure in this stage of my process. The idea of these foolproof methods of gratification, techniques which I believed reliable and justified but now see as violations, this was all very comforting at the time. I thought I had realized how warped I was, and in immersing in it, mistaking this for my will, I proved myself correct. Some things have not changed. Truthfully, I still dislike most people, even magical folk, and I still believe many of them live hollow falsehoods. But I was hardly a beacon of virtue, or even demonstrable power. I shied from many things that challenged me, and sought confirmation of my fantasies where there was none. Plainly stated, I got played on more than one occasion, and more than once I had it coming. It wasn't that I did anything horrible, and I was not exposed in any sort of way for these thoughts and actions, but that does not matter. I still regret the way I conducted myself, and am a bit embarrassed by some endeavors I undertook. I do not consider this period of less than virtuous endeavors a failure, merely a mistake. The mundane means are often the most successful, and often the key to success is simply the correct attitude. I never needed the things I thought would prove my capacities, and even knowing this somewhere in my mind, or soul, I kept on for long when I never should have. I lost friends and ruined relationships. For some it was good riddance, but even if those people were toxic there was no need for the way I handled it. That said, I still learned a lot, and much of what I learned through failure I have since distilled into wisdom. This is why I write these things. You can do whatever you want, and calling upon the aid of the spirits is not inherently wrong, and certainly not unproductive. With all this said, I would like to share what wisdom I gleaned from the shadow, the parts of my person that proved worthy to sustain during the whitening phase, and the insights that I gained into the ways that low black magicians successfully perform their endeavors. I use this wisdom to protect myself, and share it so that others may protect themselves too. It is hard to dispense what I learned without that pesky whatever you see in others is what you see in yourself notion giving me pause. I actually found myself to be naive, more than anything else. I had no idea the rate at which people lie, often for very trivial reasons, and how people behave when they see, or even think, you hold them in esteem. I realized many who I disliked never lied, and I disliked them because I felt they were superior to me in intangible ways. I identified likely causes of these assumptions I made, often just aspects of my own upbringing, and emotional baggage from my young adulthood. My first, second, and third theories on this were either incomplete or outright incorrect. I know exactly when I began seeing more clearly, and noticed then precisely how much of a threat some people were to my being. These people do not often look like bad people, and there are not clear telltale signs that anyone can identify to spot these people, unless they are performing their supposed sadism, in which case they can scarcely control themselves in displaying it. They believe others are stupid, and cannot see what they are doing at all, and this is why they will reveal their maliciousness in cartoonish fashion at key moments. The worrying part is they may be correct. I have never been able to determine if others, the good people who could help to stop them, really cannot see what they are doing or are too afraid to speak. These sadists cast their spells constantly, and on everyone in their proximal space, and the best I have found is when the others express terror in their expressions or become suddenly tongue-tied when the sadist's name or behavior are mentioned in the most roundabout of ways. There is talk on the digital plane of this behavior being psychopathic and or narcissistic. I believe these terms are poor indicators. The people being described are ordinary liars and manipulators, but have their own lives outside of some hateful and self-serving activities. These are the little vampires QAT described. I am referring to full-blown vampires. Their insanity would be criminal if they were not so afraid to cross the threshold of breaking a law. They are fundamentally cowardly, and prefer to create a vortex of untruths around their targets. The dignity necessary to run an honest and targeted smear campaign is foreign to them. Their lies are truly compulsive. Compared to those who defend a house of cards, these are the ones who build the card houses. Early on, I identified many more individuals as vampiric than I now do. LaVey did not help me, because he identifies only their pitiful traits and not their persistence and shamelessness or the damage they actually do when they cannot be swiftly dismissed in describing psychic vampires. I have met perhaps 4 or 5 in my entire life, and most not in my family were in workplaces. I believe they require a foothold more substantial than the average bullshitter or frenemy, because of their distorted social drives and peculiar relationship to space-time. They forget who they cannot see, and despite popular conceptions they do not work much via the digital plane because they seem to dislike it. Do not seek a witch to hunt, you will miss the actual monster. If you find yourself in the gravity of such a person, under no conditions should you engage them in any way, and yes, fighting back or saying no are forms of engagement. Your best chance of surviving with minimal damage is to flee. With all my knowledge and my ability to see them clearly, the best I have ever done is to torment them for a time, and they ultimately will still attain their small, pitiful victories most of the time. So I did not learn how to fully neutralize this kind of individual, but I know better how to identify them, how to bypass their attempts to attack one's confidence and sanity, and at least how to begin to counter their attacks. These people are fundamentally warped or broken. It is undeniably the result of trauma, but it is not our obligation to help them. I was raised around a few such individuals, and so I had an advantage in detecting them. I have lost 2 decent jobs to these people, but keeping them out of our domestic lives is easy. Expect great damage if they are family, but they do not fare well outside of workplaces except against the very, very vulnerable. Concluding reflections from the author, and final notes. I have detailed 2 major gains from my shadow work, the first being by way of making mistakes while endeavoring to indulge a distorted vision of my desires and will, the second in more quickly identifying individuals of exceptional toxicity, sorting them from simply unpleasant or irritating individuals, and managing the damage control that removing yourself from such a person's gravity entails. The third gain I have derived from a long and painful Nigradu phase, perhaps itself a derivative of the first gain, is in observing how many of my dark desires were constructed. I see similar everywhere, and I think I can see these because I did not share them with the other devotees of the path I see them in, or I felt them very differently. Do we all really want to be obliterated by our sexuality? Why is that not acknowledged as suicidally, especially in those who quite literally seem to aspire to an orgasm, from a demon, in the astral realm which ends our mortal existence? I do not believe these are jokes. We have all seen the desperation some really have for a demon lover. They plead with any self-proclaimed magician they can find. I once rebuked a man who contacted me, willing to destroy his life with a demonic pact, knowing this would be the result, to have sex one more time. He denied being suicidal, and this is why I rebuked him. If he is not desirous to die, why did he express such a desperate need? How would I even begin to tell the man that if he learned to stave his appetite, he could likely have sex more than one last time? This was a 40-year-old man, not an elder upon his deathbed. Why would he speak this way? But I saw this in the same lodges where Mass is held. Perhaps that specifically may indicate something about the tantric discipline maintained in this particular lodge, but my reader knows my meaning and knows that they have seen this desperate hunger. They post internet memes about such things, and it is clear their shadow work is primarily done by the taking of drugs. Their learning is not sustained, and they wear such peculiar things as digital accoutrements. Sometimes I fear what Nietzsche said may be true. There is a slave morality, similar to the vampire in its grotesquerie, but with not so much as a pitiful or twisted will. I certainly understand the urge to obliterate this, but should we not try to tell these people to cease this? These people rarely have money or influence, so it is not useful that they remain in this condition. Perhaps I cannot relate because I have consistently been sexually satisfied, but I believe the great work should be oriented towards correcting this, perfecting the humanity which exists, not encouraging suicide among those with the lowest potential or value. I have stated before, what I call the saddest part of the gnosis, that I fear not all apparent living beings may have a soul, or they may only have a small fragment of a soul, or they may have a full unit of soul materia, but it is of inferior quality. But my own soul was inferior not 13 years ago when I began on my path. Even if I was not socially inept, I was hardly graceful and had not a fraction of the capacity which I now enjoy. I would have been a poor candidate if my potential was evaluated during or before the inception of my Nigradu phase. Even now I only compare myself to the ones who seem most desperate, meager, or depraved. I have had no help, and save for QAT, my guides, and of course the hypercosmic mother and father. The will has never compelled me to render verdict upon another, even if I am so critical of our institutions and our culture. So then this is why I write. I wish my fears to be proven wrong, and I have nothing to do with this will of mine but to endeavor. I manage to make enough money, and my appetites are not extreme. I am in a happy and monogamous relationship that is secure as a chaotic world permits, and have no greater scheme of control. I still dislike most people, individually and as a collective, but my satisfaction can be likened into a rapture apparently. This is why I say with confidence that shadow work is real, and critical in importance even if one has no intention to practice the magical arts, now or even. It is a peculiar process, and like most things of real value is difficult to quantify. My hope is that sharing my experience here will be of use to anyone who has taken the time to hear my message, here and everywhere else. Best of luck to those who are true in their devotion to these things. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. This material was compounded and distributed in conjunction with the ATHENAEUM, an institution working in conjunction with the Luminous Order Loop 3. It may be freely distributed provided its contents are not augmented or truncated, especially in such situations where either this message or the star of the ATHENAEUM would be disturbed. Contact may be made at luminousorder3@gmail.com. luminousorder3@gmail.com. We continuously strive for academic rigor in discussing the nature of the subtle forces, and what they may do.